Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today. My name is Alex Pedham. I'm the Director of Policy at Y4Y Québec. I have a master's degree in political science from the University of Montreal, and I've been passionate for many years about making politics as accessible as possible. With this video, various co-presenters and I will help you better understand the upcoming 2026 provincial elections. And to be clear from the start, the goal is not to tell you how to vote. It's really to make sure you know that when the elections happen, you don't feel lost, you don't feel confused by what's going on. For a lot of people, and I very much get it, especially if you've never voted before, elections can feel really big, really abstract. There's plenty of names, political parties, headlines about this promise, that promise, and it's really not obvious how it all comes together. So in my time with you, I'll be walking us through a few main elements: how provincial elections are run, a bit about who the 5 main political parties are, and we'll be finishing by looking at something called the ballot box question. If some or all of these ideas are new to you, that's great. That's exactly what we're here for, shall we? Let's start with the basics. The next Quebec provincial election must be held by October 5th, 2026. You might think, all right, that's the election date, but it could be a little bit more flexible than that. Under Quebec's fixed date election law, the election day is set for the first Monday of October every 4 years at the latest. Elections, however, can still happen earlier. For example, if the government loses a vote on something that's important, or if that government decides from a strategic perspective that it's a good time to make an election happen, they're allowed to go ahead and set that election. So Quebec's fixed date law gives a structure, but it's far from absolute. Once the election begins, we then enter what's called the campaign. A campaign period lasts between 33 to 39 days, so roughly a month, a little more. The last one happened in 2022 during COVID, and then before that, 2018. It's during the campaign period when everything really ramps up. There'll be debates between party leaders, you'll see ads for political parties on TV and in your social media, parties will make promises in hopes to win, and you might even see politicians visiting you in your communities. During the campaign, there are of course many rules to keep things fair. Only individuals who can vote can donate, not corporations or unions, and there are strict limits on how much they can give. Political parties and candidates are the main ones allowed to spend money during the campaign, and they have to follow strict limits and report their spending publicly. The goal is to keep elections transparent and to limit the influence of money. Now, let's talk about the system that runs the elections themselves. Quebec uses what's called a first-past-the-post system. Here's the basic idea. The province is split into 125 electoral districts, also called ridings. You can think of these as your local, political zone, if you will. It's the area where you live, and everybody in that area has the same set of options of candidates to vote for. For example, I'm coming to you today from the riding of Notre-Dame-de-Grâce in Montreal. Each riding votes in one person to speak for them at Quebec's National Assembly. The National Assembly is where all elected politicians meet to make decisions and discuss laws. That's why an elected politician is also called a member of the National Assembly, or an MNA for short. So when you vote, you're voting specifically for a candidate from your own riding to represent you. Now here's the key part. The person who gets the most votes wins. That's it. They don't need 50% plus 1. They don't need a majority. The winner just needs more votes than any other person in your own riding. So if we take the example pictured here, the yellow candidate gets 30%, the purple candidate gets 45%, the crimson candidate, which is a great name, gets 15%, and the turquoise one gets 10%. This means that the purple candidate would win, right? Even though altogether 55% of voters chose another candidate. Now, that was focusing on one riding. But the same thing happens in all 125 ridings across Quebec. So in the end, what matters is not the total number of votes across the whole province, but rather how many ridings each party wins. The party that wins the most ridings is the one that then becomes the government. Another important point, you're not voting directly for the premier. That's the person who'll be in charge of the province, right? That's a common misconception. So how do we end up with a premier? Well, after the election, the party that wins the most seats, right, across Quebec becomes the government, and that party's leader becomes premier. That said, even though you don't, vote for the premier directly, many people will still base their choice on who they think would do the best job. So in practice, voters will often think about both their local candidate and the party leader. Before we actually dive into the specific parties, it's helpful to take a step back and clarify what these actually are. A political party is an organized group of people recognized by Elections Quebec who share ideas about how the government should run. At the provincial level, these ideas can relate to things like the economy, education, healthcare, etc. They present candidates in elections across different ridings, and their goal is to form government and put those ideas into action. Each party has its own priorities, but all are trying to show that they're the best choice to govern. Okay, with all this in mind, let's take a look at the political parties that will be involved in Quebec's upcoming election. For simplicity, we'll focus on the 5 main ones. By that I mean those with representation in the National Assembly currently. Here they are, in order of most to least seats. There's the Coalition Avenir Québec, le Parti libéral du Québec, Québec solidaire, le Parti québécois, and the Parti conservateur du Québec. I'll go through each in the same way: who leads the party, how many seats they currently have, and a general sense of their priorities. Even though parties may change their promises from one election to another, their overall priorities usually stay fairly consistent. These are the priorities that I'll be looking at with you. That said, I encourage you to check out party websites at your leisure and look at news coverage if you'd want to form your own opinions about each of them. Let's start with the Coalition Avenir Québec, often called the CAQ, or the CAQ. It's the current governing party and holds 80 of the 125 seats in the National Assembly. François Legault, Monsieur Legault led the party since it was founded in 2011 and served as premier for nearly 8 years until stepping down this past January. He is also the MNA for the riding of L'Assomption in the Lanaudière region. After his resignation, the party held a leadership race where members voted to choose a new leader. Because the CAQ is the governing party, this also determined who would be the next premier. Christine Fréchette was elected and is now Quebec's 33rd premier. Let's look at their priorities. The CAQ does not support Quebec's independence, but it's also less strongly pro-Canada than parties like the Quebec Liberal Party. We'll come back to them in a moment. Instead, one of the CAQ's main priorities is increasing Quebec's autonomy within Canada, meaning more control over certain decisions while remaining a part of the country. The party also focuses on protecting and promoting the French language, as well as Quebec identity. Finally, it often emphasizes economic stability, steady growth, and balanced public finances, which is a consistent theme in their messaging. Okay, let's turn to the Liberals now. The Parti libéral du Québec, often referred to as the PLQ or simply the Liberals. This party is currently led by Mr. Charles Milliard and holds 18 of the 125 seats in the National Assembly. Mr. Charles Milliard is not currently a member of the National Assembly. That's less common, but it is allowed. Mr. Milliard announced that he'll be a candidate in the riding of Orford, which is in the Estrie region. The PLQ is right now what's called the official opposition, which means it has the second highest number of seats after the CAQ and plays thus a leading role in questioning the government, holding it accountable, and offering alternative ideas. One long-standing priority of this party is called federalism. In other words, this means the Liberals support Quebec staying a part of Canada instead of becoming its own country. This position is the opposite of that of the Parti québécois, which, as we will discuss soon, supports Quebec independence. The Liberals also put an emphasis on individual rights and freedoms, including the protection of personal liberties and equal rights under the law. Finally, the PLQ emphasizes economic development, generally favoring policies that support private enterprise, investments, and job creation. I'll leave it there for the Liberals. Let's turn now to Québec solidaire. Often referred to simply as QS, this party is led by Madame Ruba Gazal and Mr. Sol Zanetti and currently has 11 seats in the National Assembly. The party has chosen a co-spokesperson model, either with one man and one woman or two women. Both Ruba Gazal and Sol Zanetti are elected MNAs. The former represents the riding of Mercier in Montreal, and the latter representing the riding of Jean Lesage in Quebec City. One key priority for Québec solidaire is social justice, reducing inequality and improving access to services. The party also focuses on the cost of living, with policies aimed at making everyday life more affordable for Quebecers. Another important priority is climate action, including efforts to address environmental issues and reducing the impacts of climate change. Québec solidaire, finally, also supports Quebec independence, sharing that position with the Parti québécois, which we'll look at now. The Parti québécois, usually referred to as the PQ, is currently led by Mr. Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, often known simply as PSPP. He is the MNA for the riding of Camille Lorrain in the East End of Montreal. The party currently has 7 of 125 seats. For the PQ, as we've mentioned, the central priority is Quebec independence, meaning the goal of Quebec becoming its own country. It also emphasizes protecting the French language and Quebec identity. While waiting for sovereignty, the party supports giving Quebec more control over its own decisions, especially in the cultural sector and the economy. Okay, now let's turn to the Parti conservateur du Québec, often referred to as the Conservatives, simply, or the PCQ. This party is led by Mr. Éric Duhem. Mr. Duhem is not either an elected MNA. It's not yet known, to my knowledge, which riding he's going to run in. In the previous elections, Mr. Duhem was a candidate in Chauveau in the Quebec City region. The PCQ currently has 1 seat in the National Assembly. One priority for the Conservatives has been reducing taxes. The party also emphasizes reducing the size of government, limiting how much the government intervenes in different areas of society and the economy. As well, the Conservative Party highlights individual freedom, often focusing on giving people more choice and more flexibility in their personal and economic decisions. So, as you can now start to see, even with some overlap, often sometimes quite a bit, these parties can approach similar issues in some very different ways. One of the best ways to learn more about these parties is to watch the leaders debate. It's a chance to see them explain their ideas and challenge each other directly. It can help you better understand their priorities and how they differ from one another. The date and time are usually both announced early during the campaign, so you can easily look it up online. Now let's turn to something called the ballot box question. This might sound abstract, admittedly, but the idea behind it is quite simple. The ballot box question refers to the main questions that many voters will have in mind when they go vote. In every election, there's of course many issues being talked about, think housing, jobs, the environment, but often one question starts to stand out above the others and helps to shape how voters come to see the election. So for many, the ballot box question captures what the election is really about. I mean, it's of course very difficult to predict ahead of time what that question will be, especially since it won't be the same for everyone, right? Sometimes we talk about what are called change elections. That's when a lot of voters, enough to potentially change the results of the election, are deciding whether to keep the current government or to move in a different direction. That's when a lot of voters, enough to potentially change the outcome of the election, are deciding whether to keep the current government or to move in a different direction. Each party, in turn, tries to present itself as the strongest answer to that question. It's important to note, though, that not every election is going to be one of these. They're not all going to be change elections. Sometimes they're more about continuity, where voters choose to keep the current direction rather than change it. But in the end, of course, there's no single reason why people vote the way they do, and that's perfectly fine. Each voter brings their own priorities and concerns to that decision, and it can change quite a bit, of course, from one person to another. Some focus on issues that are close to them, like the cost of living, as we've said, housing, while others may go for a bigger picture vote, thinking about leadership, the economic direction of the province, and the general future of Quebec. So when you think about this election, consider genuinely what matters most to you and which party you feel is most focused on that issue. So to wrap up my presentation, we've seen how the system works, we've looked at the main political parties and the priorities that distinguish them from one another. We explored the idea of the ballot box question and how everyone, in the end, have their own reason to vote. Thank you so much.
Salut, je m'appelle Nicolas et je travaille à Élections Québec. Aujourd'hui, on vous propose d'en apprendre plus sur le processus électoral québécois, sur la façon dont les citoyennes et citoyens peuvent voter et d'en apprendre plus sur un acteur clé de notre démocratie, Élections Québec. Élections Québec, c'est un organisme qui est neutre et impartial. Sa mission, c'est d'assurer l'intégrité, la transparence et la fiabilité des élections. Nous sommes responsables d'organiser les élections provinciales au Québec. Nous soutenons également les municipalités québécoises et les commissions scolaires anglophones dans l'organisation de leurs élections. Nous faisons aussi respecter les règles de financement politique, informons les citoyennes et les citoyens et proposons des améliorations au processus électoral. Mais quelles sont les conditions pour pouvoir voter au Québec? Allons voir ma collègue Caroline Paquette pour en discuter. Bonjour Caroline.
Bonjour Nicolas.
Dis-moi Caroline, qui peut voter au Québec?
Il faut avoir 18 ans et plus. Il faut être citoyen ou citoyenne canadienne. Il faut habiter au Québec depuis au moins 6 mois le jour de l'élection. Et également, il ne faut pas avoir perdu ses droits électoraux. Je vais rajouter à ça, il faut être inscrit à la liste électorale, bien entendu. Sinon, on ne pourra pas voter.
Comment on peut vérifier si on est inscrit sur la liste électorale?
On va sur le site web d'Élections Québec, sur la page « Vérifier son inscription à la liste électorale ». On rentre ensuite nos coordonnées, son nom, en fait, la date de naissance et son adresse. Et puis là, on a un petit clic, on voit si on est bien sur la liste électorale. Normalement, là, on est inscrit sur la liste électorale si on remplit les critères. Mais si ce n'est pas le cas, on fait une petite demande à Élections Québec. Là, on communique avec Élections Québec, puis on va faire, nous, de notre côté, on va procéder à la révision là, d'un électeur sur la liste électorale.
Très bien, c'est facile. Élections Québec envoie différents documents informatifs durant la période électorale. Est-ce que tu peux m'en parler?
Oui, absolument. Donc, au début de la période électorale, vous allez recevoir, en fait, les électeurs vont recevoir là, un avis d'inscription. Sur cet avis d'inscription-là, on va avoir d'abord tous les résidents là, qui habitent à la même adresse. Donc, c'est une façon aussi de vérifier si on est inscrit à sur la liste électorale. Ensuite, on va avoir l'endroit, l'heure et la journée pour les votes par anticipation. Donc, c'est possible avec cette carte-là de se rendre à l'endroit, le bureau de vote pour le vote par anticipation. Puis ensuite, quelques jours là, avant le jour du scrutin, on reçoit une carte de rappel de couleur jaune avec également là, le bureau, l'endroit, donc l'adresse, les heures et la journée de vote pour aller voter le jour du scrutin. Puis sur cette même carte-là, on a également la liste des candidats et des candidates là, dans une circonscription donnée pour l'élection.
Merci pour toutes ces informations, Caroline.
Ça fait plaisir.
Mon collègue François Lamy va maintenant nous expliquer comment voter. Vous allez voir, c'est vraiment pas compliqué.
Suivez-moi, je vais vous montrer comment ça se passe quand on va voter.
Lorsque vous arrivez au lieu de vote, le personnel électoral vous accueille à l'entrée et vous dirige vers votre table de vote. Vous pouvez montrer votre carte de rappel si vous l'avez, mais ce n'est pas obligatoire. S'il y a déjà un électeur à la table de vote qui vous est assigné, vous devez attendre le signal du personnel pour vous avancer vers la table. Lorsque vous arrivez à la table de vote, présentez l'une des 5 pièces d'identité acceptées et dites votre nom et votre adresse à visage découvert au personnel électoral. Ensuite, le personnel vous remettra votre bulletin de vote et un crayon. Il vous expliquera aussi comment voter. C'est le moment tant attendu. Rendez-vous derrière l'isoloir avec votre bulletin et le crayon. Sur le bulletin de vote, faites un X, un crochet ou une autre marque dans un seul cercle à côté du nom de la candidate ou du candidat de votre choix à l'aide du crayon que vous a remis la scrutatrice. L'important, c'est que la marque soit claire. Lorsque vous avez marqué votre bulletin de vote, repliez-le comme il vous a été remis. Votre vote reste secret. Retournez à la table de vote, détachez le talon de votre bulletin en suivant le pointillé et remettez-le au personnel. Déposez votre bulletin de vote dans l'urne, le tour est joué. Vous avez voté. Dès que vous avez déposé votre bulletin de vote dans l'urne, il est protégé. Personne ne peut modifier votre marque. À la fermeture des bureaux de vote, une équipe de 2 personnes contrôle les votes à la main.
C'est aussi simple que ça. Maintenant, c'est à votre tour.
Maintenant qu'on sait voter, reste à faire un choix. C'est pas toujours facile d'avoir de l'information sur les candidatures et les partis politiques. Pour nous éclairer, allons voir mon collègue Gabriel sauver le siège. Bonjour Gabriel.
Bonjour.
Gabriel, est-ce que tu as des conseils à nous donner pour alimenter notre réflexion ou nous aider à y voir plus clair?
Bien, il n'y a pas de bonne ou de mauvaise réponse, hein, ce n'est pas un examen d'école, mais on peut toujours commencer en se demandant qu'est-ce qui est important pour moi? C'est quoi mes valeurs? C'est quoi mes intérêts? Ça, on peut en parler avec notre famille, avec nos amis. Ça peut nous amener à réfléchir aussi, à nous donner des pistes, voir eux qu'est-ce qu'ils pensent. Ensuite, ben, on peut s'intéresser à l'actualité. Ça peut être un gros contrat aussi, là, comme ça. Ben, on peut se dire qu'on commence avec un sujet qui nous intéresse, avec un sujet qu'on connaît un peu déjà ou ce qui nous donne envie de continuer à lire. On peut le faire avec des articles, on peut le faire sur le web, on peut le faire à la télé, à la radio, dans des balados. Il y a plein de façons de s'informer aujourd'hui. L'idée, c'est de commencer avec quelque chose qui nous intéresse. Ensuite, il y a les partis politiques qui vont avoir, les candidats aussi, les partis politiques vont avoir sur leur site Internet ou sur leurs médias sociaux, ils vont parler de leurs engagements, ils vont parler de leurs valeurs, de ce qu'ils veulent faire, de ce qu'ils proposent. Ça peut être une façon de regarder en fonction de nous, nos valeurs ou de nous, qu'est-ce qu'on juge important. Est-ce que ça correspond? Est-ce que ça nous donne envie de voter pour ces gens-là? Puis évidemment, il y a beaucoup de gens qui utilisent les médias sociaux pour s'informer aujourd'hui. L'important, c'est de garder en tête que tout n'est pas toujours vrai, puis aussi qu'on peut aller plus loin que ce qui nous est proposé. Hein. Les algorithmes nous proposent de l'information sur notre fil d'actualité, mais c'est pas toujours neutre et on peut aller plus loin en nous-mêmes en allant chercher des comptes qui nous intéressent.
On le sait, en période électorale, on voit vraiment beaucoup d'informations, entre autres sur les médias sociaux. On le sait, elles ne sont pas toutes fiables. Alors, comment on peut s'outiller contre les fausses informations?
Il y a plusieurs façons de faire pour essayer de trouver des indices pour nous permettre de voir si c'est une information qui est fiable. Souvent, là, la base, c'est d'aller voir la source. Qui communique, qui est derrière la publication. Est-ce que c'est une source qui est crédible, qui a une expertise sur le sujet dont elle parle ou elle n'a aucun rapport avec le sujet? Ensuite, voir le ton de la publication. Si c'est trop émotif ou un peu sensationnaliste, ben, peut-être que l'objectif, c'est pas de nous informer, mais plus de nous faire réagir. Donc, vérifier, contrôler nos émotions avant de partager, de relayer une info. Puis aussi, ben, de s'intéresser aux faits. Est-ce qu'on peut les vérifier? Est-ce que si c'est un extrait ou une capture d'écran, est-ce qu'on peut retrouver l'article? Est-ce qu'on peut retrouver le reportage ou la vidéo complète? Des fois, il y a des images qui peuvent être vraies, mais elles sont tirées hors contexte. Fait que c'est plus tout à fait la bonne information qu'on nous communique. Mais c'est déjà des bons réflexes à avoir. Puis on n'est pas obligé de toutes les faire en même temps, mais tranquillement, petit à petit, on peut les ajouter.
Est-ce que c'est une bonne idée de m'informer sur les élections à l'aide de l'intelligence artificielle?
Bien, l'intelligence artificielle, il n'y a aucune garantie que l'information générée va être exacte ou complète. C'est le rôle d'Élections Québec d'informer le public. On organise les élections, mais on rend aussi disponible plein d'informations à la fois par la poste, mais aussi en ligne sur notre site Web. Il y a notamment 2 sections. Il y a une section qui s'appelle « Comprendre » ou « Voter » qui nous permet de savoir où voter, quand voter, aussi de comprendre comment on peut s'inscrire à la liste électorale, comment ça fonctionne, le décompte des votes, comment on compte les votes à la fin de la journée. Ça, c'est disponible en français, en anglais. On fait aussi des vidéos d'information sur notre compte Instagram, sur Facebook. Fait qu'on essaie de multiplier les façons de rendre de l'information qui est exacte, qui est précise, pour que les gens puissent s'informer avec toute confiance.
Merci, Gabriel, pour toutes ces informations.
Merci à toi.
Il y a différentes façons de participer à la démocratie. Par exemple, savez-vous qu'il est possible de travailler lors des élections? Allons voir ma collègue Jessica Beaulieu pour en discuter. Bonjour Jessica.
Bonjour.
Dis-moi Jessica, les personnes qui veulent travailler aux élections, est-ce qu'elles reçoivent un salaire?
Ben oui, certainement qu'elles reçoivent un salaire. C'est drôle, hein, on dirait que les gens pensent parfois que c'est du bénévolat, travailler dans le cadre des élections. Je l'entends souvent, mais c'est pas du tout le cas. En fait, c'est des emplois qui sont quand même bien payés. Le salaire, ça varie entre environ 20 et 27 de l'heure, là, évidemment, selon le poste occupé. Si quelqu'un veut savoir le taux horaire pour chacun des salaires, toute l'information est disponible sur le site web d'Élections Québec. Si on va dans la section carrière, on a vraiment la description des différents postes qui sont disponibles, le taux horaire, puis on a même une petite vidéo sympathique là, qui explique les tâches qui sont associées à chacun des postes.
Puis qui peut appliquer sur ces postes-là?
C'est vraiment ouvert à un très grand nombre de personnes. En fait, pour travailler dans le cadre des élections, il faut d'abord être citoyen canadien. Il faut habiter au Québec depuis au moins 6 mois. Puis, il faut avoir 16 ans et plus. Donc, on pourrait penser que c'est réservé aux gens qui sont électrices ou électeurs, mais non. Déjà, depuis quelques années, les jeunes de 16 ans et plus peuvent travailler dans le cadre des élections. Donc, je pense que ça fait vraiment une expérience de travail qui est intéressante.
Puis, comment les personnes intéressées vont pouvoir postuler?
façon la plus simple de postuler, c'est d'aller sur le site web d'Élections Québec. Dans la section carrière, on a un formulaire en ligne pour postuler. Donc, il suffit de donner ses informations, ses coordonnées, indiquer le ou les catégories de postes qui nous intéressent, les disponibilités. On peut préciser si on a de l'expérience ou non. Comme je mentionnais, c'est vraiment pas essentiel d'en avoir. On clique sur « Soumettre » et voilà, le tour est joué. Puis, le recrutement va commencer à partir du déclenchement de l'élection parce que c'est fait en circonscription. Donc, dès le décret jusqu'au dernier jour là, qui précède le jour de l'élection, il y a du recrutement qui se fait en circonscription.
Merci pour toutes les informations, Jessica.
Ça fait plaisir.
Alors voilà, vous en connaissez maintenant un peu plus sur le rôle d'Élections Québec et les différentes façons de participer à la démocratie. Pour avoir les bonnes informations sur le processus électoral et les prochaines élections, je vous invite à visiter le site web d'Élections Québec. C'est la référence à privilégier. Je vous remercie de votre écoute et on se voit dans un bureau de vote.
Hi, my name is Irmak. I work at Apathy's Boring. Apathy's Boring is a nonpartisan charitable organization that works to support and educate youth to be active and contributing citizens in Canada's democracy. As part of our work, we have something called the Vote Initiative. Our goal with Vote is to provide young Canadians with information, motivation, and the support you may need to be able to participate in the elections. We know that historically not everyone had the same access to traditional democratic systems such as voting. This includes youth who are not university educated, youth who have been systematically marginalized, and youth who have immigrated to Canada within the last 10 years. I myself became a citizen 2 years ago. Our goal is to make the information and the process as accessible as possible for everybody. The main reason is we believe that a strong democracy is one where everyone can participate, have their voice be heard, and take actions to change the conditions in which they live. Let's give a little context to what we're talking about here. In this chart here, you can see the voter turnout by age groups over the years. The orange line is the general population. The blue line is 25 to 34-year-olds. The black line is 18 to 24-year-olds. You will notice that the 18 to 24-year-old age group has the lowest rate of participation compared to the general population. Why do you think that is? According to a survey from Statistics Quebec, these are some of the reasons why your peers have chosen to vote or not vote in the 2022 provincial elections. The reasons for voting were 63% said they were doing it because it was their civic duty. 25% said they were doing it to change things. 12% said they voted because they liked the party or the candidate. The reasons for not voting included 45% saying they didn't know about the election happening, 25% saying that they were busy, and 18% saying that they assumed their vote wouldn't matter. Now, take a moment to reflect on where you stand. Have you ever voted before? What is your first memory around voting or elections? What are your plans for the upcoming provincial election in October? Why does this all matter? As young people, we care about what's happening in the world. We're often at the forefront of social movements and protests. At the same time, often we're told that we don't show up. But here's the truth, we do, and showing up to the polls is another way of proving them wrong and showing the politicians that they have to listen to our voices. What now? You may be watching this in May, June, July, or August. There are many things you can do, and no action is too small. Think about the things that impact your life. Cost of living, education system, the healthcare system. Many of these things are under the responsibility of the provincial government. Voting is a very important way of sharing your voice. The politicians that are chosen are there to represent you. Until the voting day, you can start having conversations with your friends and your family. Reflect on issues that impact your life. See if there are any campaigns or initiatives that you want to support or join. You can also make some plans, maybe choose a friend, a voting buddy, to keep each other accountable. You can also check out our work at Apathy is Boring at our website or our Instagram for ways to get involved. We'll be sharing more information before the elections. We hope that this was useful for you.
Hi guys, this is Youssef. I'm part of the Poli-Jeunes team, and today we are here to talk to you about politics. But first, Let us take a moment to introduce ourselves. Poli-Jeunes is a group of cégep and university students brought together within a non-profit organization with a simple mission: to encourage political engagement among young people in Quebec. In a context where politics can sometimes seem distant or even complex, Poli-Jeunes seeks to make it more accessible and engaging. Our goal is to cultivate a generation of young people who are informed, engaged, and capable of actively participating in public life at all levels of governance. Poli-Jeunes acts as a true bridge between young people and the spheres of power by creating open and nonpartisan spaces for reflection. Through activities, debates, and the highlighting of inspiring journeys, we aim to spark a genuine interest in politics among the next generation. Through activities, debates, and the highlighting of inspiring journeys, we aim to spark a genuine interest in politics among the next generation.
Hi everyone, this is Frishta. And actually, let me start with a question real quick. Do you know what an internship actually is? Contrary to what people might think, it's not actually just fetching coffee or shadowing someone. Indeed, in most cases, students have concrete tasks and genuinely contribute to the work. Take, for example, a hospital in northern Montreal. It hosts approximately 550 students every single day. These students come from various levels of training, including university, cégep, and vocational programs. They work in areas such as medical services, nursing, technical, and professional services, and research. In other words, these students, they directly participate in essential sectors and contribute to how the system functions. In Quebec, the majority of internships required to obtain a diploma are unpaid. According to the Institut de Recherche et d'Information Socio-Économique, approximately 84% of students do not receive full compensation for their internships. This means that for most students, completing their program involves working for free while meeting their academic requirements. Despite this contribution, most of this work remains unpaid. While implementing paid internships across Quebec has been estimated to cost around $388 million, this investment could reduce financial pressure on students and better recognize the value of their work. It's not just a question of cost, but it's also a matter of fairness and recognition for young people and the work that they put in into society every single day. Actually, let me also ask you another question while we're in the field of questions. Do you think young people are well represented in political decision making? Indeed, we're talking French here because à l'Assemblée nationale du Québec or the National Assembly of Quebec, young people remain underrepresented relative to their share of the population. The average age of elected officials is around 51 years old, and only about 12.8 people are under 40. This means that while some people are present, the representation does not fully reflect the demographic reality of society. This issue has been debated for 6-7 years. As early as 2016, proposals were already being put forward to promote greater inclusion of young people in leadership positions within public institutions. The fact that these discussions are still going today suggests that progress has been limited and gradual. But interestingly, this has not been a recent phenomenon. Historical data shows that the average age of elected officials has remained relatively stable over time, around 49.6 years old in 1923 compared to approximately 50.6 years old today. Despite major societal transformations, the age composition of political institutions have changed very little. Overall, while efforts and discussions around youth inclusion do exist, the current level of representation does not fully reflect their place in society, raising such an important question about decision-making and how much space is given to young people's voices in society.
Hi, I'm Neila, part of the Poli-Jeunes team, and I want to ask you a third question. How many of you feel confident that you will be able to afford your own place to live in the near future? For many young people in Canada, that question is becoming harder and harder to answer. Access to affordable housing is no longer just a step toward independence. It has become a major obstacle slowing down the transition to adulthood. Young people are particularly affected by the housing crisis. While about 45% of Canadians are worried about their ability to pay for housing, that figure rises to 59% among those aged 20 to 35. This shows that the younger generation faces a disproportionate level of uncertainty when it comes to something as fundamental as having a place to live. One of the main reasons is their position in the housing market. About 63% of those aged 15 to 29 are renters, compared to only about 33% of the general population. Meaning, young people are far more exposed to rising rent and unstable housing conditions. The impact on their lifestyle is significant. More and more young adults are delaying leaving the family home. Nearly half of those aged 25 to 34 still live with their parents. And even when they do leave, they often have to make compromises. Shared housing is becoming increasingly common, not by choice, but out of necessity. Financially, the burden is considerable. A large portion of young people's income goes toward rent, leaving less for other essential needs like food, education, or savings. Meanwhile, home ownership remains out of reach for the vast majority, widening the gap between those with financial resources and those without. In Quebec, this reality is very concrete. In cities like Montreal, rents have risen sharply in recent years and vacancy rates are very low, making it increasingly difficult to find an affordable apartment, especially for young people. The housing crisis is not just about affordability, it directly affects young people's autonomy, delays their life plan, and increases their financial vulnerability. What was once a normal step into adulthood is becoming harder and harder to reach. I'm done with questions, but now let's look at another issue closely tied to this reality: food insecurity, meaning difficulty accessing sufficient and quality food for financial reasons. This affects a large portion of the Canadian population, including young people. In a context of rising food prices, this situation concerns not only low-income households, but also many students and young workers. According to Statistics Canada, the proportion of households experiencing food insecurity rose from 16.8% in 2019 to 22.9% in 2023, a significant increase. For young people, this can take several forms. A study from the Université de Montréal found that approximately 45% of those aged 19 to 25 experienced at least one episode of food insecurity over the course of a recent year. In Quebec, recent data suggests that a significant share of those aged 18 to 34 are affected to varying degrees. Several factors contribute to this situation, including rising food costs, the cost of housing, and changes in income levels. The effects vary depending on individual circumstances. Some people may change their eating habits or cut back on their expenses. In some cases, food insecurity can affect concentration, academic, or professional performances, and overall well-being. Food insecurity, like housing, is part of a broader reflection on the living conditions of young people. It highlights the challenges some of them face in meeting their most basic needs.
Thank you for listening, and who knows, maybe we'll see you at one of our events. Follow us on Instagram at Poli-Jeunes and stay tuned for next time. Bye.